Have you always been curious if you were raised by a narcissistic parent? Well, welcome back to the Heal the Hurt podcast. In today's show, we're going to talk about what are the characteristics of a narcissistic parent? And if you happen to fall into that category, what are the consequences? How does that being raised by a narcissistic parent then translate into our adult life? Because you may be unsure, but when you hear of what it would look like as an adult, you may go, oh my God, I struggle with all of that. Wow, this really helps me tie it together. But most importantly, I encourage you to stay to the end because maybe you already know. You're like, oh, Kenny, there is no doubt I was raised by a narcissist. Well, hang out till the end because I'm going to give you some solutions on how to begin the recovery process to get your life back, because nobody deserves this. You were a perfect child, and there was nothing you did to deserve the parenting that you received, and you deserve to recover from that and get your heart and soul back. And so I'll give you some basic starting points of how you can begin to do that. Now, before we get started in this, I want to suggest something that I don't tell you what to do. That would sound very narcissistic. But I would suggest that you watch a previous video of mine titled, Are They a Narcissist or a Codependent? And I suggest that because many people are confusing what's called a falsely empowered codependent with a narcissist. And there are three key distinctions between the two because they look almost identical. But these three distinctions, they're important to recognize because in your recovery, one, look, you don't want to be recovering from something that you aren't struggling with. It's like going to the doctor because you have a broken arm and they perform surgery on your ankle. That's not what you want. You want to make sure you're getting the solutions to exactly what you're struggling with. And so I highly encourage you to watch that video so you can determine, wow, okay, while this looked like a lot of narcissism, it's actually codependence that, a falsely empowered codependent I was raised by. And that'll make a big difference in your recovery and the way you go about your recovery. So again, I really encourage that you watch that, all right? So let's get started with the characteristics. The first thing to recognize is with a narcissistic parent, the child exists to meet the selfish needs of the parent. So whatever's going on, the child's a prop. That's it. Everything is about the parent. Now, many of us have been raised by parents that are falsely empowered who have moments that are like that. That's one of the differences, is moments. But with a narcissistic parent, this is consistent throughout. They don't care. We, as children, are props, all right? So one of the ways they do that is they use the child or they live vicariously through the child. So the child's individuality, their thoughts, their feelings, desires, their dreams, their needs and wants are completely ignored. All of them, all of those dreams, needs, and wants are fashioned and controlled and decided by the parent. They're molded. It has to be to please the parent. And the parent will use a lot of guilt. If you try and go off on your own, they'll turn that on you of, oh my gosh, you really don't care. There's always this double bind that you're placed in. If I go pursue me, I'm letting mom or dad down, whichever, maybe hopefully it wasn't both parents, but usually it's one. But there's that, you're always placed in that double bind, and the parent is always making these decisions for you. The second, part underneath that is you're treated like an ornament. As your parent pursues their status, their career, their activities, or promoting their own self-importance through charities or social media, you're propped up as an ornament. Look at what you're doing in school. Look at the athlete. Look at how great they look. Everything, you're just the ornament, another decoration that's a part of, or did you have a parent who they tell you about the great things one child did, that was the ornament, but you'd be standing right there and they wouldn't say anything about you because you weren't as good. You weren't the ornament that they could prop up to lift their self-importance, okay? Now again, parents may do this at times. Both of my parents did this. My parents weren't narcissistic. They both had severe narcissistic traits. They had moments of it, but they weren't, again, there's a consistency factor. That's why I want you to watch that other video when you know the difference. Most parents have moments of narcissism, but they are not completely narcissistic throughout our whole childhood and the way they raised us, all right? The second characteristic is that the parents are always superior, and they will fight for their superiority. You can never eclipse them. And so what that means is the parent competes with the child. Like I have one client. She has a hobby of hers, and a parent of one of her parents has the same hobby. And whenever, they talk on the phone, if she ever talks about her hobby, that parent always has to belittle what she's done and say that they've done it better. Even though as they're getting older, they're getting worse and worse at the hobby, they keep belittling they have to be superior, they have to be better. So they're constantly competing. And then they will criticize and nitpick, they will compare and judge everything the child does against themselves. All right, so you may succeed at something and they will diminish, well, that's not the best. If you went over here, they're better. Like every achievement is, your knees are cut out from underneath you. So the child's successes are belittled or even completely negated, and the parent's abilities are always superior. All right, even in the face of complete lack of superiority. This was one of those moments. My dad did this to me a lot. This was how he had narcissistic moments. My father had to be superior. I was playing pro golf and we were watching golf once. We went and played golf and we're watching golf as we're eating lunch afterwards, and we're talking about the golf swing. Now, my dad was a brilliant man. He was an engineer and knew a lot of things, but he didn't know golf. And so he's trying to tell me how the golf swing works, and I'm sitting there going, I even turned to him, I said, Dad, let me ask you something. Do you think it would be reasonable of me to tell you about electrical engineering? He kind of looks at me and he goes, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, do you think I know as much about electrical engineering as you do? And he's like, well, no, of course not. I said, you're right, I don't, because I didn't get a master's in it. I haven't been doing it for a career, and all my life. And so that makes you, all those years of training and everything make you an expert, correct? He's like, yeah. And I said, well, can you see how it would be frustrating or confusing to me that I'm a professional in what I do, and yet you want to argue with me? And man, the anger. Well, just boom. He had to be superior. He couldn't admit that he didn't have as much information about a certain topic. All right. Now, again, my dad wasn't that way with everything. There were moments of it. So that's why, again, please go watch that other video. All right. Another way they express their superiority is they are possessive and competitive and critical, and will be in competition with your friends, whoever you date or even marry. They have to be above them. You'll see this a lot when somebody gets engaged or something. All of a sudden the family or the parents turn on the new person in the family. They'll do anything they're just not good enough for you. There's all these constant complaints. The parent always belittles the new spouse or boyfriend or friends. They're constantly trying to segregate you because they need their position of superiority. Okay? Characteristic number 3 is they seek exterior validation. The parent does. They're constantly parading their own accomplishments, their life, their trophy husband, their trophy wife, their trophy kids, their trophy associations, their lifestyle in front of others. It is on display at all times. They're always seeking what's called a better than position. This is less than, this is better than. They're constantly, everything is in comparison, and it is all predicated on exterior validation. This was another area, like my father. When I first quit drinking, my mom was an alcoholic. And I quit I was 21 or 22 when I quit drinking. And this was in the 80s, and it was kind of becoming okay to be an alcoholic, but it was still a big scarlet letter. Nowadays, it's okay to say people don't really care. But back then, it was a scarlet letter. And so my dad would get irate that I would, if we'd be somewhere, someone goes, "You want a drink?" I'd say, "Oh, no, thanks, I'm an alcoholic." And that would just, oh my God. Kenny, you don't share those kinds of things. Because it was a reflection on him. And see, he needed, for his son to be good, because it was about how he looked as a father. It had nothing to do, my feelings and who I was didn't matter. I was the ornament in that situation, okay? And so I was exterior validation. Well, if I'm an alcoholic, he doesn't get validation for whatever it is I achieve or don't achieve, all right? So they will constantly be seeking that validation from outside of themselves, placing themselves in positions where they can be recognized for that. Characteristic number 4 is they will use shame, blame, manipulation, and coercion constantly to control you, to keep you beneath them. So they will do this by the way you dress, the way you act, the way you perform, is an embarrassment. Like there was an example of it, with my father. I was an embarrassment to my father, all right? They will use guilt, or they will guilt you by boasting about how much they've done for you. This is common with narcissistic parents, especially as you try to leave the nest. They will guilt you back of, well, I've done this. And in my book, Your Journey to Success, I show this where there's a daughter. It's this long email exchange of how the parents are trying to control the daughter by how much they spent on her. And we put you through college and did this and raised you and bought you clothes. Like, it is this massive guilt trip. Well, wait a minute. Think about that. The child didn't ask to be born. You as a parent decided to have a child. You're responsible to pay for your child. Like, it always cracks me up when I see that. You see a lot of reality shows. Parents want credit. I want credit for all I've done for you. Why? Like, think of that. Why'd you have a child? It's your job to take care of them. You don't deserve credit for it. It is part of the job description. And many parents, even non-narcissistic parents, want credit, and they will guilt their children for how much they've done for them. Well, you know what? Keep that to yourself. If you had an issue with it, then you shouldn't have had kids. That's on you. Don't make me carry that for you, okay? They will also blame you for how unhappy they are in their life. Okay, this can go along with the guilt aspect of, maybe their spouse, their partner has died, and now they blame you because they're all alone and you've left them for this new husband or wife. There are many different ways they can blame you. They'll manipulate you with money or other vices to get you to do what they want. I had a client she was almost 30 years old, never had a job. Mom lived in another state. Mom would pay all of her bills, rent, everything, credit, everything. Everything. Mom used money to control her. And she was a severe addict. And she decided, ran into me, decided to get help. And it was fascinating to watch. If she spent any money, charged anything like yoga, any type of self-care, anything to recover, her mother would threaten to cut her off financially. She could have credit card bills, bar bills, over $10,000 in a month. Mom wouldn't say anything. But if she spent $70 on a yoga class or something like that, Mom would threaten to cut her off. that severe narcissism to control a child that way and manipulate them and hold that power over them. All right? They will also be very coercive to get what they want immediately. They'll just barge into your house. They will put you in a place where you must decide. They'll use the blame, the shame, the guilt, and the coercion to immediately get you to come take care of them in that moment. And if you don't, you're a bad child. All right? Number 5, they're rigidly controlling and highly sensitive. All right, so this is basically, expressed as it's their way or the highway. No matter what, you're always wrong. Any thought, feeling, action, belief has to always align with them. And any sort of disagreement creates explosiveness. They cannot experience. Remember, with a narcissist, they have severe shame and tremendous low self-esteem, so they can never be wrong. Now, again, this would be an area with my father. He wasn't a narcissist, but he had tremendously low self-esteem. It's where I got it too. I can react this way. I can get very defensive and hurt, but luckily I can catch myself and work myself out of it now. I still have moments, but it's there. Now, again, the difference is a narcissist wouldn't be aware that that's happening. They would negate. They just like, what? That's not even possible. You're just wrong. And that was my father's. Like I said, that golf example. He just couldn't let in the truth. Like, I could hold up this napkin. And he just, no. Kenny, that's a computer. What do you mean it's a napkin? Like, he couldn't be wrong. And the more you challenged him, the more explosive he'd get. All right? Again, that was a moment, but a true narcissist is consistent with that all the way through their life. All right? Number 6, they lack empathy. It's an inability to register the child's feelings, thoughts, and that the child is inherently important. That you as a child are inherently worth something. So in other words, the sense is you don't matter. You don't have any worth to this parent in your life. Like, think of the overwhelming nature of that feeling. That's the lack of empathy. And all that matters is theirs. And so this is why if you're having a bad day, they'll immediately turn it, well, what about my day? Well, that you think that's bad. What about this? Like, it's always spun back to them. My mom would do that. That's one area my mom had a narcissistic quality. It was actually, as I got older, it became cute. As a kid, it was horrifically annoying, but now I just can't help but laugh. My parents would always do this great Christmas dinner, and the whole family was there. It was beautiful. It was like Norman Rockwell. And my dad was a great storyteller, and so after we eat, there'd be all these stories going around, and sometimes politics, just all these different discussions. And my mom, invariably, everyone's just going, and all of a sudden my mom would go, so, what do you think about my dress? It had to be about my mom and her dress and how she looked, like, everyone would roll their eyes, oh God, here we go again. But now I look back and it just cracks me up because my mother ultimately was just severely immature from her drinking. People don't recognize this, but when you become an alcoholic, when you start drinking as an alcoholic, your emotional maturity stops at that age. Well, my mom was just a child, so my mother never really matured out of being a child. Well, when a child does something like that, it's kind of adorable. And see, as I grew in my recovery, I could look back on my mother, hold her accountable that she chose. She did get sober and did some work on herself. I can hold her accountable that she was less than perfect, but I can also forgive her and see that she was just doing the best she could. And, if somebody is a child, like I saw her authentically, my mother was a child. Doesn't matter how old she was, in her 60s, she was still really, in many ways, an infant. Well, an infant can't really take care of themselves and isn't socially appropriate all the time. They're going to make those kinds of mistakes. And so that's me seeing my mom authentically, not holding it against her and loving her for where she is, But also recognizing that behavior is severely inappropriate. Do you see? That's why I use that term perfect imperfections. All right? They can coexist. So many people in relationships, they just want the perfect. They can't accept the imperfection, which is really, that means they can't accept their own imperfection. And so that's why I'm such a big proponent of that term. We all have perfect imperfections, okay? They're unavoidable. The goal in life is for us to become aware of them and forgive ourselves for them. And if I can forgive me, that opens the door to you being able to forgive me, okay? Because if I'm aware of them and I communicate them and I own them, now we can have a discussion about it. It's part of why I'm so transparent with my perfect imperfections is I'm not standing here up above everybody. I'm trying to be vulnerable and go, look, I'm a train wreck too. It's something we both share. Like you're here to get information. I'm no different, other than maybe I've spent many more years working on this, so I might have a little bit more insight and some skills and tools that can help people if they choose to invest in it and learn about it and make their life better. But it doesn't make me better. It just means this is what I've spent my time working on. But I am imperfect. And that's the value of it, is it allows for reconciliation. Perfect imperfections allows for connection and reconciliation. All right? Number 7, the 7th characteristic is caretaking. And what I mean by this is the narcissistic parent, they expect the child to take care of them throughout childhood, into adulthood, and beyond. And I mean emotionally, physically, many times financially, in virtually every area. And they want you to put them above your own kids and your own family because, after all, like I said earlier, you owe me. I'm your parent. You know, there's this misconception that we have to take care of our parents. Well, no, it's our parents' job to have worked to a position where they can take care of themselves. Now, many times life is difficult, and many parents work their tail off, and life had a lot of circumstances where they weren't allowed, they weren't able to create a nest egg where they could take care of themselves into retirement. That shouldn't be held against them. And so many times children have to chip in at the end. But narcissism is different. Even for those that have made it, there's this expectation that, no, you have to take care of them. This was, prevalent in my first marriage. I remember I got scolded because my ex's parents decided to have a garage sale on a Friday, and I didn't take work off to take care of them and help them. Like, I had my own business to run, and I was a bad person because I didn't give up my business to help them do they're both retired. He's got they got tons of money. They're not hurt. They get to hire somebody to help them move stuff out. And it wouldn't even dent their money, but I was supposed to quit. I'm struggling. We're building a family, but I'm supposed to take the day off to take care of them. Obviously that it's just a perfect imperfection. We don't teach these things, so they just didn't know any better. But that's an example of it. Now, again, it's not just every once in a while, but it's an underlying message of, no, you have to let go of everything for me. Drop your kids and family. None of that matters. Your parent matters more than anything. So there's an expectation that the parent needs to be caretaked. I don't know if that's the right word. Throughout life. That they, again, do you see the common characteristic in all 7 of these? They are the mountaintop. Everything revolves around them. And the key is it has to be consistent at all times. Not moments, like I shared some moments where my parents acted like that, but it wasn't in every situation that happened. Okay? So how do these translate? Now that you're an adult, you're like, okay, I've looked through this. I went and watched that other video, Kenny. You're right. I was raised by a narcissist. I can see it now. Well, how does that show up as an adult? Well, there are several things. Low self-esteem, anxiety, and or depression will be prevalent. They'll be codependent in many or all of their relationships, have very poor boundaries, if you're raised by a narcissistic parent, tend to be a people pleaser. It'll almost be impossible for them to say no. It's very difficult, even if they do. They'll be racked with chronic guilt if they say no, but even if they're not saying no, they're racked with chronic guilt. This is the saddest piece. They are left with tremendous emptiness. Now, they may not feel it, they may medicate it away, but behind all the ways they medicate, and this is why they won't seek recovery, because they don't want to feel how empty they are. All right? That was my biggest struggle in my recovery, was because of my parents' imperfections, the most painful experience was the emptiness, the sense of complete isolation and aloneness and abandonment that I experienced through a lot of my childhood. It's a really creepy feeling to make peace with. It's not comfortable. That's what most people are trying to avoid. But that's where the healing is. We have to fill that hole that was left. Okay? They also, a person raised by a narcissistic parent has an inability to express their emotions or even handle their emotions. They can be all over the place and react, quickly, or be completely shut down and shut off. They have trust issues, really struggle with indecision. Many times can't make decisions for themselves. They'll relinquish that decision-making power to others. And sadly, they will almost always pick narcissistic parent or narcissistic people in relationships. You do not end up in a narcissistic adult relationship unless you suffered severe trauma in childhood. And a lot of people push back on that. Well, that's just because of this is going to sound very demeaning. I mean, how can I say, I would love to find a way to say this where at least to me it doesn't come across as demeaning, and I haven't figured it out yet, but I'll keep trying. People that think their childhood, that they ended up with a narcissist, but their childhood was fine, are so detached from reality of how abusive their childhood was. It's heartbreaking. Now, if they ever do the work and investigation, they would see, oh, wow, my parents were really perfectly imperfect. Now I see it. But where they are in their journey right now, they're lacking so much information because we don't teach this stuff. Think of it. This is what's crazy. Malcolm Gladwell, his book, right? He talks about it takes 10,000 hours to be proficient at something, to become an expert in it. None of us take a single class on how to be a parent or how to have a relationship. Yet we all think we're experts and we all think we know how our childhood was. It would take 10,000 hours of learning and studying and getting to know what healthy parenting is to be able to make that determination. Yet we think we know. That's the level of disconnect. All right? Because we get our information from media and it's all garbage. Nothing is deep enough. It's very superficial. And so that's what's happening to somebody is a person who picks a narcissist just doesn't have the information. And so they are unaware that their childhood was filled with lots of pain. All right? So what are the solutions? If you can get past that and you can recognize, okay, maybe I can't agree with you, Kenny, that I'm not far enough in my journey to admit that my childhood was imperfect. Where do I start? How do I turn all of this around? Well, the first thing is trauma recovery. Even if you don't feel you've been through trauma, you have been through trauma. If you know you were raised by a narcissistic parent, you went through horrific trauma, like unspeakable. Now, you may not feel it or notice it yet, but that's a defense mechanism. You use that to survive, but to get your life back, you're going to have to address that. Number two, codependence recovery, because as you can see, many of these dynamics, it became your job to care for them. You had to give up your life. You were an ornament, a possession for them to use as they saw fit. It was never about you. well, that left you in a place where now you're dependent on others to get validation because of that empty hole that was left inside of you. That needs to be dealt with. Where do you go for that? Well, you go to an expert, someone like myself. It doesn't have to be me. This is number 3. You have to hire an expert. You cannot navigate this recovery through watching videos or reading books. You can gain some information. You can gain some skills and tools, but you will never recover on your own. You can't. We need outside expertise to teach us. Now, it doesn't have to be me. But people ask me, for suggestions. Here's my suggestion. They need to be experts in childhood trauma recovery, and codependence recovery. Now, maybe you're not at a place financially where you can commit to recovery. Or maybe you're not ready to. A lot of times people say they aren't ready financially. They're just not ready to invest in themselves because the narcissism has been so severe, their self-esteem. They see recovery as a cost. They're also not ready to let go. Whatever it may be, please go to my website, www.thegreatnessuniversity.com. That's www.thegreatnessuniversity.com. Everything there is free, all right? You have videos on codependence, videos on narcissism, articles on both topics, articles and videos on childhood trauma, processes that you can do on your own to start healing that. Go to the free content section. There are all these downloads, exercises you can download to start doing on your own. There are book reviews and book recommendations. If you're ready to spend a little bit of money on yourself and invest a little bit, then I have a whole list of books that I recommend as part of the recovery journey. You can begin there. You can also learn about my masterclasses. Some of them you can buy the Audible version for like $5. That's a very small investment in yourself. You can just do the Audible. It doesn't give you the journey books and the videos, but at least you can start listening to it. Then you may decide you want to do the masterclasses. Fine. There's also my private group. You can learn about it there, where right now, for very little every month, you get coaching from me. You also get, most everyone in there has been raised by a narcissist, been in a relationship with a narcissist. So you get a support group of people who are learning the skills and tools to heal from all of this. So those are all options that range from free, and it depends on where you are in the journey of what you're ready to invest in yourself, all right? And also your financial situation. Finally, if you like this, please like it. If you think it'll help somebody, please share it. And leave me your comments, whether it was about your upbringing or whatever it is you may like to share. Go ahead and leave me a message. And as always, enjoy the journey.